Hey, this is Nicky G and welcome to Better Commander. Alright, the secret's out. I'm buying all the 40k commander decks. Let's take a look at Tyranid Swarm. Man, I used to be a huge 40k nerd. I had multiple armies and even sold my services as a painter to desperate Warhammer addicts. I love making the scenery, I love the majesty of the armies arrayed against each other, fully painted. I never got around to making a Tyranid army, but I was always a huge fan of the aesthetic. The models were mean, low to the ground killing machines. They swooped in with their bioweapons and shot up the like button, and they always subscribed for maximum evolutionary progress, and you should too. I'll share my genes. Alright, so you're sitting there thinking, Nicky G, what do I do with all these precons? I'm not made of money and I need to eventually buy food. Okay, well, we'll walk you through the new cards and tell you what I think about making a coherent deck. I don't play by these arbitrary rules. 10 cards in, 10 cards out. You didn't follow proto, buddy. You're done. Why? Why not 16 out and 16 in? Who cares? What we really want to do is make the deck hum like a refrigerator and hit like a train. But none of us are Elon Musk or Thelon of Havenwood. We're just ordinary average fools. So let's keep it reasonable, $40. Alright, so first off, who's our commander? This deck comes with two good options. The Swarm Lord is 3 green, blue, and a red for a legendary creature. It's a Tyranid 5/5. It has rapid regeneration. The Swarm Lord enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. It also has Xenos Cunning. Whenever a creature you control with a counter on it dies, draw a card. Dang man, this thing is diesel. It's just a big hairy monster really, and a really awesome build around in its own right. It just says counter, so this can reach into weird counters, Ikoria keyword counters, and the old +1/+1 counters. Then we come to Magus Lucia Kane, 1 green, a blue, and a red for a legendary creature, Human Tyranid Wizard. It's a 1/1. Has Spiritual Leader. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Also has Psychic Stimulus. This is the real meat of this card. Tap, add colorless. When you next cast a spell with X in its mana cost or activate an ability with X in its activation cost this turn, copy that spell or ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. At first I thought this was Magus Jada Pinkett Smith. Don't tell Will. This is an incredibly powerful mana dork in the command zone. We're copying X spells, that's awesome. We're adding untappers, which is even better. If you untap with, say, Vizier of Tumbling Sands, you can double your mana and double the delayed triggers from Lucia. Alright, before we decide on a commander, let's take a look at the new mechanic from the Tyranid Swarm deck, Ravenous. There are these X spells that say Ravenous, so basically this creature enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. If X is 5 or more, draw a card when it enters. There are 11 cards in the deck that have Ravenous, and another 7 or so that deal with +1/+1 counters, not including the Swarm Lord. All the Ravenous spells are X spells, and there is a peculiar little guy that deals with that. The Nexos Strategic Coordinator. Basic lands you control have tap, add colorless, spend this mana only on costs that contain X. Alright, let's cut the suspense. I'm running Magus Lucia Kane as the commander. There's so many good X spells to copy, and the Ravenous cards are pretty good by themselves, but I'm running the Swarm Lord in the deck. He's a tank as well. So let's take a look at some of the cards in the deck, highlight some really good ones. We got the Biophagus. He's 1 and a green for a creature. Human Tyranid Wizard, it's a 1/3. Has Genomic Enhancement. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. If this mana is spent to cast a creature spell, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. This is the best 2 mana dork I've seen for a Counters Matters deck. I want this for Atraxa Proliferate and pretty much any other creature deck that's running green. We have the Turbigon, X1 and a green for a creature Tyranid. It's a 0/0 with Ravenous. It also has Trample. It has Spawn Termagants. Whenever a Turbigon deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green Tyranid creature tokens. There's a token sub-theme running through the deck. I think it's more suited to the Swarm Lord as the commander, but this card's awesome. And we got Sporocyst, XX and a green. I had a Sporocyst removed by a doctor the other day. It's a creature Tyranid 0/0 with Ravenous. It also has Defender. It has the ability Spore Chimney. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for up to X basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. I underestimated this. I was a little low on it at first, but if you even pump 5 mana into this thing, making X equal to 2, then the Magus copies it, getting 4 basic lands onto the battlefield. That's pretty sick, but it has Defender and then just sits there, so it also stinks. I'm torn, but it's a good setup card. You got Zoanthrope, X blue and a red for a creature Tyranid. It's a 0/0, also has Ravenous. It has Flying and Ward 2. It has Warp Blast. When it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target. This thing's kind of a little ridiculous for the cost. Flying and Ward 2 plus the enter the battlefield. This thing's one of my favorite cards in this precon. Then you got your Adeline Jackal, cream of the crop. 1 red and a green for a creature Human Tyranid Scout. It's a 2/2 with Trample and Haste. It has Skilled Outrider. Whenever Adeline Jackal deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, and shuffle. I don't know what to think about this guy. On turn 2 or 3, is there a player that doesn't have a 2/2 that can block it? I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't have all the data, but it looks good. Needs a little more testing. Now, Exocrine is X and 2 red for a creature Tyranid 2/2, has Ravenous, has Bioplasmic Barrage. When it enters the battlefield, deals X damage to each player and each other creature. So basically, this kills everything. Kills your board, but then it stays alive afterwards. Again, this is situational, and you could underpower it to kill your opponent's utility creatures. Plus, if you're copying it, you can draw a couple cards. Again, on this one, not sure what to think. You got the Aberrant. This dude looks like my uncle. X1 and a green for a creature Tyranid Mutant. It's a 0/0 with Ravenous. Has Trample and Heavy Power Hammer. Whenever Aberrant deals combat damage to a player, destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls. What a fantastic ability, and Ravenous to boot. We can copy it with our commander and just start killing everybody's enchantments and artifacts. I like the Pure Strain Gene Stealer. It's a 2 and a green for a creature Tyranid 1/1. It enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Has Vanguard Species. Whenever it attacks, you may remove a +1/+1 counter from it. If you do, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. In conjunction with our commander, we can put a +1/+1 on this fool anytime, and we can get a nice land each turn. It's a weird card. I like it though. And you got your Tyranid Optimus Prime, 1 green and a blue for a creature Tyranid. It's a 0/4. It has Evolve, and it has Synapse creature. Other creatures you control have Evolve. This is great for growing our board. If we copy a Ravenous creature with the Magus, then we can get an Evolve trigger twice, making our smaller utility creatures into bigger threats late game. Tyrant Guard, this guy has Heroic Intervention text on it. You can sacrifice him to do a Heroic Intervention. He can save our board from wipes and targeted removal. It's a fantastic complement to the Magus, Ravenous to boot. Broodlord is another Ravenous creature that comes down and grows whatever other evasive creatures we have out. Boom, +12 power on board, man. I love that thing. Clamivus, look at this guy calling everybody down to the clam steam. He's 4 and a green for a creature Human Tyranid Artificer. He has Proclamator Hailer. Each creature you control gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on it. Plays right into our +1/+1 counter strategy and our Ravenous creatures. Winged Hive Tyrant, great support creature, has flying and haste, has Will of the Hive Mind. Other creatures you control with counters on them have flying and haste. This is an awesome setup piece for our counter strategy. So what are we taking out? Acolyte Hybrid. Decent card, doesn't really fit here. Death Leaper is a weird card and I like it a lot. It has flash and haste and it's a cool little build around. I think it would go great in a Xenaghost deck as well. And we took out the Flock, we took out the Locust, and we took out the Patriarch. They don't really fit with our strategy. This is one of my favorite new cards, but he's coming right out of this deck. Garrison Starn, or whatever the heck his name is, he's getting his own fat deck. He's a sweet little guy. Love him. And we took out the Haruspex, however you pronounce that. The Bio-Titan, we took out the Lictor, we took out the Red Terror, we took out the Tyranid Hierodon, we took out the Tyranid Invasion. Take all that stuff right out of there. I took out Bone Sabers. This is an interesting little card. It's a little inefficient, but I think there's a home for this somewhere. Just not here. I also took out the Tribal Payoff artifacts, Icon of Ancestry, and Herald's Horn. There's just not enough Tyranids in the deck after I've messed around with it. Herald's Horn is a great card, but you need more Tyranids. You need more whatever your tribe is. Abundance can go too. There are better draw engines for a creature deck for sure. Alright, so what are we putting into the deck? We're definitely putting in Fathom Mage. Alright, we can just put a counter on this thing with the Magus at the beginning of combat with her first ability. And if our plan comes to fruition, we'll be untapping the Magus, copying spells, and evolving constantly. We also added Animar, Soul of Elements. This guy just gets bigger and better as the game goes on and makes our Ravenous creatures bigger and cost less. Plus it plays into our +1/+1 counter strategy. Speaking of which, you got the Dusk Shell Crawler. It's a 0/3 for 1 and a green creature insect. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has Trample. This can be an honorary Tyranid for the day, who cares? And it can get big in conjunction with some of our other cards. This brings us to our untappers. We have Kiora Behemoth Beckoner, 2 and a hybrid Simic mana. Legendary Planeswalker Kiora. Loyalty starting 7. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. It has -1 untap target permanent. This is going to draw cards. It's going to untap the Magus. Lucia Kane can tap again, thereby generating 2 delayed triggers for the next time we cast a spell with X in its casting cost, getting us 2 copies. Same goes for Kelpie Guide and Vizier of Tumbling Sands. Our Ravenous creatures will enter and draw us cards and get us whatever other triggers that they have. Fantastic strategy in this deck. There's some really good X-Spell creatures we want to include, like Hydroid Krasis. It's X green and blue for a creature Jellyfish Hydra Beast. When you cast this spell, you gain X life and draw half X cards, round down each time. Has flying and trample. Hydroid Krasis enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Now, you only get the first ability when you cast the spell, not on the copy, but you do get a copy of your flying trample creature. This is a great card to play in any deck where you're using big mana, and now you get just an extra one. The cast trigger is a non-bow with the Magus, but it's still a nice creature. Speaking of nice creatures, we got Incubation Druid. This thing can get a counter on it as soon as we cast our commander, so it can tap for 3 mana and just be an awesome mana dork. Steelbane Hydra, fantastic removal and a cute little turtle guy. We got Stone Coil Serpent. I'm always surprised by how good this is. Protection from multicolored always seems relevant. I also added Voracious Hydra, as this can double as a removal spell. When he comes in, he gets copied and he fights a couple puny winklings that skip leg day, brother. Alright, we'll want to be refilling our hand at some point, so we got Finale of Revelation, Silver Scrutiny. They can just easily refill our hand. You save a ton of mana when you copy them. Either is 3 mana +2 from the Magus, you draw 6 cards. Pull from Tomorrow, similar, but you gotta discard a card for each copy, but can be cast at instant speed. I also put in a couple direct damage spells, Jaya's Immolating Inferno and Rolling Thunder. Either of these can be a finisher if you can achieve a decent board state, or you can just use it to take out some nuisance creatures. Now, Fractal Harness, this replaces Bone Sabers, and this is the X spell that we want. When it enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 green and blue Fractal creature token, put X +1/+1 counters on it, and attach Fractal Harness to it. Whenever it attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on it. Very efficient in this deck. We're getting 4 tokens for our mana, and we can equip the harness to one of our Ravenous or Evasive creatures that are already on the battlefield. I also added Swiftfoot Boots because it's a good card, and Magus Lucia Kane is going to get targeted once everybody sees how good she is. I added Fertile Ground as it synergizes with our untappers, and if our commander is exploded, we can untap a land for a little burst of mana. And Garruk's Uprising, this is a no-brainer in this deck. It does so much. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample. We like that. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Rhythm of the Wild is another enchantment that's great in an aggro deck, plus it synergizes with our +1/+1 counter theme. And lastly, I took out some of the crappy tap lands that give you life and put in the Snarls. You can go nuts upgrading the mana base though, as the one that this deck comes with is kinda poo. Alright, I didn't put them in this version, but I'll tell you guys some little secrets, okay? If you want to do some combos, you get a Pheto Alchemist and Seeker of Skybreak, and you can create an infinite loop if you equip either with Illusionist Bracers. You just tap to untap target permanent. You can target itself, and it can also target the Magus. You can untap Magus Lucia all day long, then tap, copy whatever burn spell you want. Or you can get freed from the real onto the Magus, then put a Prismite onto the battlefield. You're generating infinite mana, you're doing all kinds of untappy stuff, you're having a great time. But you know what, I didn't include those because I'm not an animal. I'm going for a 75% deck here. We're not trying to combo out. I'm aiming for powerful, but not infinite. There's a combo deck there for sure though, if you wanted to go down that avenue. I think Magus Lucia Kane would be an awesome combo commander. I also got to give a shout out to my boy, the Magus of the Candelabra. I used to go to Fish concerts with this dude in college. He's a fun guy. We'd give each other little presents and stuff. So he has this activated ability, X and tap, untap X target lands. If you copy this with our old gal, Magus Lucia Kane, you're generating tons of mana, and it's a solid value to include in any deck, even if you're not going for combo. I'm going to link the deck list in the description. Goldfish it, try it out on Tabletop Simulator with your buddies, or just ignore this entire video and walk the cursed earth as a bitter shell of your former self. It's all good, you do you, but hit that like button, subscribe for more, and send me a big old pungent comment, and keep on keeping on. This is Nicky G from Better Commander, signing off.